Good afternoon, everybody. Evan Lazar, Alex Barth, Patriots Beat podcast here on this Tuesday afternoon. And this is definitely the most unique podcast I have ever done, Alex, as I am sitting here in the hotel lobby because I had to check out of my room. So I am in the lobby right now, sitting on a couch in the middle. I'm not going to tell people where I am because I don't want any weirdos coming to get me, but the Patriots playing.
Mr. Important, Mr. Celebrity doesn't want to get swarmed by the paparazzi.
They're not the paparazzi. I don't know who's listening to this. You never know. Anyways, so this is definitely a little bit weird for me to be doing this from here, but we're going to do our best with it, and we're going to take you through day 2 of Patriots training camp now. Joint practices with the Eagles.
I honestly almost made it weirder. I seriously contemplated eating a bowl of spaghetti during this show. I am very hungry.
Also,
I haven't been food shopping. It's the only food I have. You almost saw me just stuffing my face with spaghetti during the show.
Full disclosure, I did get a Wawa sub right before we did the other show on 98.5, the training camp, whatever you call it. What do you got a working title there, Alex? It's
the training camp. It doesn't really have a title.
The training camp recap podcast over at 98.5. We did that as well today. And right before that, I stuffed my face with the Wawa hoagie, as they call it here in Philadelphia. And that was very, very good. Last night we were at Chickies and Pete's, which is a basically famous sports bar here in Philly. I was going to say it was the Fours of Philadelphia, but now Fours, the original,
made me sad.
Doesn't even exist anymore. So it's not really the Fours, but that is typically up there in terms of top 10 greatest sports bars in the country. That was a whole lot of fun. And we are going to get into day 2 of joint practices here today, just to kind of paint the picture of the day for everybody. It was a very brisk hour and 20 minutes practice session, not as physical as it was yesterday, not as in-depth as it was yesterday. As Bill Belichick said this morning, the Patriots and Eagles worked exclusively in the red zone today. A lot of 7-on-7 work for both sides of the field, or both sides of the ball, I should say. So a ton of passing, a ton of 7-on-7, a ton of red zone stuff. And we can talk about it all, starting with the quarterbacks. A much sharper Cam Newton out at Tuesday's practice. And I have a theory as to why he played well today versus yesterday. But I'll just take you through some of the throws first, and then we can talk about some of the specifics of why I feel that maybe this is happening with Cam. A 13-15 overall. Christian Wilkerson had a drop, so he's really 13-14, because if you count the drop in favor of Cam, it was a catchable pass that should have been caught by Wilkerson in the back of the end zone for another touchdown. So he was really good. He was on fire for a while there. Now, the Eagles did sort of feel like he was checking it down a whole lot, but in my eyes, Alex, he was taking what the defense was giving him. He wasn't forcing the ball down the field just to force the ball down the field. And I felt like it was a good decision-making type of day for Cam. He got the ball out quickly. He threw it accurately. And like I said, towards the end of practice, he definitely found a rhythm and threw, I want to say, 4 or 5 consecutive touchdowns at one point. So it was really a much better day from Cam Newton today.
Yeah, and I think, that checkdowns aren't necessarily a bad thing. It just means you're making the right reads. It means you're not forcing the ball down the field. So obviously I wasn't there. I can't assess it in person. But yeah, no, it sounded like it was a better day. And we talked about too yesterday, the offensive line may be struggling a little bit, and it sounded like they had a better day today.
Yeah, I got some people going by me in the lobby right now. That's the background noise that you're hearing. Like I said, we're going to do our best and push through this right now. But I want to talk about why I feel that this is happening. Because, Alex, remember the first, 4 or 5 days of training camp, the Patriots back in Foxborough worked almost exclusively in the red zone as well. And a lot of questions to Bill Belichick about when were they going to get outside into the 20s, and when were they going to start to go on drives and do the whole thing. And he was talking about how the red zone is this shorter, compact space that they have to make quick decisions in and get the ball out and make precise movements and things like that. And I think what we see with Cam, and the reason why I brought up the first 5 practices is because the narrative out of those first 5 practices is that this was an improved Cam Newton. Remember, we really thought that he had taken a step forward in this offense, and he was getting the ball out on time. He wasn't holding as much as in the pocket. He wasn't turning the ball over as much. And my theory is, and I want to hear your opinion on this, is that when the Patriots operate these practice sessions in tight in the red zone, the area of the field is requiring Cam Newton to speed up his process, right? And when you get into that area of the field and when it's so compact, you can't afford to hold on to the football. You have to make a quick decision and you have to get rid of the ball. Whereas I think when they get out into the field between the 20s, Cam, the sort of holding the ball and that kind of tendency started to creep back in for him. So then we get back in the red zone with day 2 of joint practices, and it feels like the ball was coming out quickly again. The ball was coming out on time. So something tells me that something goes off in Cam Newton's head when he's in the red zone and he says, wow, I need to be quicker here. I need to be more precise here. I need to get the ball out faster. And then when he gets between the 20s, he wants to hold the football a little bit more. So maybe the situation is causing Cam Newton to speed up his process and look better in the red zone practices versus the practices where they're in between the 20s.
That's an interesting theory. I don't totally disagree with that. I wonder if some of it too is, I don't know. This is a really crude analogy. I can't figure out how to explain it better. Remember, like, growing up the first day of school, or like when you first move into a new apartment, right? And like, I'm not the cleanest person. I'm not the messiest, but I'm not the cleanest, right? But you first move in, or it's the first day of school, you got your desk right, and everything's clean. Everything's where you want it to be. You're like, I'm going to stay on top of this. I'm going to keep this up. And then in like 2 weeks, you kind of just get back in your normal routine. Like, right. Does that register? Like, I wonder if for Cam, it was just the start of camp. He had this whole thing that he was, I'm going to do this and this and this. And then just by playing so much, he's kind of regressed back into the guy he was last year. And I don't think he's totally regressed back, by the way. Let me say that. I do think he has been better than he was last year, especially when it comes to ball placement, which is a big thing. But I wonder if I wonder if there's some what's the word I'm looking for? Why can I say complacency? Complacency. Thank you. I wonder if there's some complacency with him. And, he said the other day that the joint practices broke up the monotony of camp. And he's not the only one who feels camp's monotonous. I think a lot of players feel that, but I wonder if, you just kind of got into the dog days of the summer, and that's what it was.
I think that's a great point too. I think there's a chance, and I also think that when you're dealing with small sample sizes, right? When you're dealing with 3 practices, 4 practices, none of them in pads, and now we have seen the entire sample of 15 practices with a bunch of them in pads, now 2 joint practices with the Eagles. So we've seen a lot more football at this point. So there are going to be ups and downs. And I think that that's sort of what we've seen from Cam, but a very strong day from Cam today. And I think the one specific thing, we mentioned the checkdowns thing. I actually took that as a good thing again, and we're going to get to in a second why, because Mac Jones was on the other side of the spectrum at one point, and it came back to bite him. And the other thing is working those short little routes inside the formation. Jacoby Myers had a huge day today. He had 6 catches during team drills, working those little option routes off leverage to the running backs, to guys like Myers, Bourne. Cam was very sharp working the underneath coverage. So even though they were checkdowns in Kevon Wallace's mind, I sort of felt like that was what he should be doing, because that was what the defense was giving him. And at every check down, every 3 or 4 yards in the red zone, you're creeping a little bit closer to the goal line, right? And especially with this offense, you get them down to the 1 or the 2. Well, now a bully ball comes into play and you just bull the other team over and get the ball in the end zone. So it does feel like that is the best thing for this offense sometimes. And that's good that Cam Newton was willing to take those opportunities underneath the defense and not push it into tight coverage just for the sake of throwing the football down the field. On the other side, Mac Jones definitely had some moments today that were good, but the one thing that I think really stood out to everybody was the interception middle of or so of practice in terms of 7-on-7s. He tried to force a ball to Devin Asiasi. TJ Edwards, the linebacker for the Eagles, picked it off. There were actually 3 Eagles that I think would have picked off the pass before it got to Asiasi. There was no chance on the throw whatsoever. Asiasi was definitely not open. And this was for the second day in a row. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday as well. For the second day in a row, we've seen Mac Jones throw the ball up for grabs in spots that you definitely wouldn't want to see him put the ball. In day 1, it was on deep balls to Gunner and Christian Wilkerson, where he was throwing into the safety rotation and was nearly picked off. Today, he does get picked off in the red zone. So I do think he needs to make better decisions with the football. I think that there's maybe a little bit of adjustment going on there in terms of learning and calibrating what's NFL open versus what was open at Alabama and what he can get away with and what his arm strength will allow him to fit a ball into a tight window. But these chances that he is taking down the field, and I asked him directly about this after practice yesterday, I asked him, are you taking chances to see what you can get away with, right? Are these practice interceptions? Right. And he didn't really go for that line of thinking. I think he kind of disagreed with me. He said, no, the goal is to string together positive plays. We don't want to be turning the football over. I got to fix that. So this isn't, not that it was ever purposeful to throw an interception, but these aren't those types of practice interceptions where he's just trying to fit the ball into a tighter window to see if he can make a play there or not and learn from it. These are plays that I think he needs to cut out of his game completely.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I've talked about it in the past that Brady has said he would, test receivers and whatever on some of those interceptions. You don't throw test interceptions in joint practices. This is the time for evaluation. These practices are key for Mac Jones winning that job. He's not going to test things now. He's going to use what he's tested and put it into action now. So that's a concerning interception because you don't want to see a rookie forcing throws. That's the kind of bad habits that make it that those are the reasons why he's not ready to start week 1. Because you can't be forcing throws. You need to know the answer before you throw the football. You shouldn't be throwing a ball that has a chance of getting intercepted. Now, sometimes defensive backs make great plays. Sometimes the ball doesn't come out of your hand right. But you shouldn't throw a ball thinking like even 50-50 balls, right? The quarterback's not thinking that's 50-50. We're thinking it's 50-50. You shouldn't be throwing a ball as a quarterback if you think that that's a throw. So yeah, that's a throw I'm sure he wishes he had back. And that's, again, the reason why he's made a ton of progress this summer, but he's not ready to start yet.
Those types of throws definitely need to be cut out because they're throws that are easily avoidable too, right? I mean, you look at the receiver, he's definitely covered, right? So there's no sense to throwing that football. The deep balls yesterday on Monday that he threw up for grabs were just bad decisions with the football. And those are things that should be able to be coached out of him, come out of his process, because those are definitely throws that he can't have at this level or any level really of football. Now, on the other side of it, though, for Mac, there were a lot of positives, and that interception was his only incompletion of the entire practice, right? He threw 10 straight completions to end practice. He really did a nice job of working, like Cam Newton, those little option routes off leverage in the middle of the field. He hit James White on an angle route. He hit N'Keal Harry a couple of times, but the throw of practice for both quarterbacks. Cam had a nice one to Nelson Aguilar in the corner of the end zone too. That was a really good throw in 7-on-7, but they did have one early portion of practice where they went into 11-on-11s, and Cam threw 2 passes and Mac threw 2 passes. And Mac made a throw to James White. I tweeted about it when it happened live. That was what you look at that throw and you say that's why the Patriots drafted him 15th overall. That's the Mac Jones that the Patriots need. Right. And what happened was, I didn't see who it was that put pressure on Jones, but somebody came off the right side, was turning the corner on Jones and put pressure on him in the pocket. He was looking down the right sideline at the time in the first read of his progression. He stepped up in the pocket, eluded the rush, got his eyes back to the left-hand side because the right side was covered, found James White behind the defense on the left side on a corner route, and dropped a teardrop dime in the bucket for James White for a touchdown. So that type of process, the pocket movement, the progression speed, the timing of the route, and then obviously the throw and the accuracy, that's Mac Jones, right? That's why I keep saying that I feel like he's a great fit for what they do and all these types of positives about Mac Jones. So that was the type of throw that made me think early on in practice is going to be another one of those days, right? That's going to be another one of those strong Mac days. The interception kind of put a little bit of a damper on that, but that throw in particular was extremely impressive from Mac.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of what it's been, and that's what you're going to get with a rookie. You're going to get those moments where you see it break through, and you're going to get the moments where it doesn't. And I've kind of talked about this from the beginning. It's, not necessarily about Mac Jones becoming a more talented football player per se. It's just about him becoming more consistent. And Bill Belichick's talked about this, that the number one thing he's looking for at that position is consistency. So, and I'm not saying that Cam's been the most consistent quarterback, but again, I don't think Mac can be as good as Cam, because Cam has just built-in advantages between the experience, what he gives you with his legs, all of that. Mac has to be better, significantly better, and that comes with the consistency. And I just don't know that we've seen that consistency yet from him.
We haven't yet. We we need to see a clean practice from Mac Jones, right? Where one that he doesn't turn the football over, one that he doesn't put the football up for grabs like he did on Monday, where he didn't actually have an interception in practice, but there were two instances where he easily could have been picked off. I talked about it in Monday's show. Basically, on those two throws yesterday, Christian Wilkerson and Gunnar Olszewski turned into the defensive backs, and the Eagles' safety was the wide receiver, right? And they had to play defense to make sure that the ball wasn't intercepted. So those are the types of plays that can happen. Let's talk about these wide receivers. I wanted to talk about the tight end situation in a second as well. But because today was so heavy on 7-on-7, we got a lot of opportunities for reps for the wide receivers as well as the quarterbacks. Do you want to start with the good or the bad, Alex?
I feel like we were just kind of negative about the quarterback, so let's start with the good.
Okay, N'Keal Harry had another strong day of practice out there today, sitting on the goal line in between zone coverage, finding those soft spots, making himself available for the quarterback. He had 2 touchdowns in 7-on-7s. He had another good grab in 1-on-1s. He lost another 1-on-1. But overall, a decent day for N'Keal Harry again out there today. And you see the size, you see that ability to make himself big and box out and protect the catch point on the goal line. It wasn't a high point fade. It wasn't a back shoulder. It was these little sit down routes, kind of like the touchdown that he caught against the Chargers last year from Cam on the goal line. It was basically those types of same type of play, same type of idea. So another strong practice from N'Keal. He practiced well on Monday as well. At some point, you got to show up for the final exam, which is game day, and actually play well in the games. But still stringing together good practices and still making progress in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, the joint practices, Bill Belichick puts so much weight on them when it comes to making the team. And they were never going to cut him. I never believed they were going to cut him. I know people think I hate him, that he's good enough that they weren't going to cut him. I thought that there might be a point with when you factor in the trade request that they would trade him just for the sake of trading him to get him off the roster, get him a fresh start, give themselves a fresh start. I think what we've seen over the last 2 days is the final nail in that coffin where they're not going to trade him just to trade him. Somebody comes along, blows him away, offers a top 100 pick, then yeah, I still think it's on the table. Absolutely. But I think he's proven over these last couple of practices, because again, they put so much weight on the joint practices that he should be a part of this team, and they're going to want him as a part of this team if they can work that out.
Definitely brings a different skill set than the rest of the wide receivers, right? That group in general, inside guys like Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne, guy like Nelson Aguilar, who's a burner but doesn't necessarily have size. N'Keal Harry brings size. He brings outside ability. He definitely has a little bit of a different thing about him than maybe some of the other players in that position group. And like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said they're not going to just trade him just to trade him now. Right, the conditional 6th-round pick for N'Keal Harry just because he wants out, I think that is off the table. I think he's played well enough in these practices that for the Patriots that have seen him every single day, just like us, I think that they can sit there and say he's too valuable, or at least he's too good of a football player. I won't call him valuable, but he's too good of a football player to trade him for a 7th-round pick. Right now, they're going to have to get a 3rd. They're going to have to maybe get a 4th if they get something in return, maybe, or something like that. But it's going to have to be a decent draft pick, I think, to pull N'Keal Harry out of New England. So I think that that's a pretty good thing to come away with if you're a Patriots fan, that at the very least, maybe he's helped out his trade value. And not to take a victory lap, but this is exactly why I didn't want them to trade him before training camp, because I thought the buzz, the hype, the string together some good practices, put some good preseason tape on film, and you never know that trade value could get inflated. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. Is if they trade him before training camp, they probably get a conditional 6th for him, maybe something like that.
But again, he's playing well. He's playing well. That conditional goes up, right? If he played well elsewhere, I still don't think I was wrong. If he had played well elsewhere, that pick becomes more valuable. It's all about what condition you could put on it. But that's true. No, I think that they made the right decision by keeping him. I guess maybe I was a little off on that, but yeah, I think it now becomes tough because now you're looking at, I'm sure we'll get to Christian Wilkerson, but you're looking at 5 or 6 receivers. You're looking at 6 running backs. You're looking at potentially 4 tight ends. It's just a lot of bodies in those 3 positions. I'm not saying they can't do it. I actually have that set up on my upcoming roster projection that'll be up tomorrow morning on 98.5thesportshub.com. But yeah, when I say I got a lot of talent there, people push back. Who's their number 1 receiver? Talent doesn't just mean top end. I mean, they got depth there. They've got depth. So
I agree. I've never been. I don't know how much top end talent that they have necessarily. They don't have Tyreek Hill or Julio Jones or Devontae Adams or somebody like that headlining this receiving group. But I have been saying for a while now. Now the tight ends being hurt, and we're going to get to that in a second, definitely doesn't help their cause. But in terms of pass catching talent overall and the ability to move the football through the air, I've never been concerned about the pass catchers, and I still am not concerned about the pass catchers. I think they got plenty there in this group. If they get the quarterback play and they get the coaching that they're expecting, I think they're going to be just fine in terms of the receiving talent they have on this team. But one of the big caveats to that is the tight end position. And out there today, Devin Asiasi was the only tight end healthy enough to participate in practice on Tuesday. So the Patriots had one tight end. Fumagalli was there. He was not dressed. Hunter Henry was dressed but did not participate later in practice once they got into the contact portion. Johnny Smith and Hunter Henry were not spotted at practice. So the tight end room has caught the injury bug, right? Everybody's hurt in the tight end room. And on top of all of that, Devin Asiasi is coming back from COVID. So he's not 100% just yet in terms of conditioning and all that kind of stuff. So the tight end room is decimated right now. I don't know how much it matters in terms of actually practicing on the field these couple of days, but in terms of what it matters long term, I think it will be a little bit of a factor once the season gets underway, that assuming it is Cam to start the season, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, and Jacoby Myers is going to be sort of your top pass catching group. How many reps in training camp have those five guys really gotten at this point? Because these tight ends are constantly hurt. So the chemistry, the kind of feel for each other, the chemistry is the word. I don't know if that's going to necessarily be there as strongly as they wanted to start the season.
Well, isn't there? Have Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry been on the field for practice together once? Like going back to the spring?
I think very early.
Right. It hasn't been a ton. So, yeah, I mean, that's certainly something you have to worry about. I think the rate that they've built chemistry with both Cam and Mac has actually stood out to me to this point. I think that they've, kind of gotten together at an impressive pace, but it's still not a ton. So I certainly think that's something, worth worrying about. And that's where a guy like Jacoby Myers and even N'Keal Harry comes in, where at least they worked with Cam last year. So at least there's some sort of familiarity there, and that could be valuable early in the season.
Right. And there's another thing I would say as well when you look at today for the Eagles, and we're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball for a second in Philadelphia here today. Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert had great practices today. They worked a ton of 7-on-7 in the red zone. And as you would expect, the tight ends were big targets for the Eagles down there by the goal line. And the Patriots didn't have tight ends out there to throw to. So this practice, you talked about earlier, Alex, how important the joint practices were for Bill Belichick. Joint practice, red zone work, and your two star tight ends are not healthy enough to participate. It feels like a big opportunity loss for the Patriots. There's certainly plenty more opportunities over the next couple of weeks. They have the 2 games still. They have the joint practices with the Giants next week. So all those things are still on the table for them to get out there and do all these sorts of things. But this was a really important practice, it felt like, in terms of building chemistry between quarterback and receiver with those 2 tight ends in the red zone, and they weren't able to participate. So that was a little bit of a damper on Tuesday's practice.
Yeah, it certainly was. And it is and it isn't, I guess, because you want these guys to be ready for week 1, ultimately. Even if they have less time to get ready, you want these guys to be ready for week 1. Part of the issue, I don't mean to go back to this, part of the issue with N'Keal Harry, I think, was they really ruined his rookie year summer, right? Remember that game in Detroit, the first preseason game, he goes in, he has a couple catches, he pulls up with his hamstring, and they put him back in the game, and then he practiced for another day or 2 before he went on IR. That was a disaster. I don't want to see them do that again. So yeah, it sucks they're not out there, and everything you mentioned is valid, but at the same time, it's nice to see a different approach and them taking it seriously with these guys and making sure these guys are fully healthy to go for week 1.
Sure. Offensive line. So heavy 7-on-7 practice today. There weren't a ton of live 11-on-11s where we really got to see the offensive and defensive lines go at it. But there was an extended 1-on-1 period earlier in practice. And if you're a Patriots fan, you'll love to hear this. Very first rep, Brandon Graham versus Trent Brown. Trent Brown absolutely stonewalls Brandon Graham, very good edge rusher for the Eagles. Next rep, Shaq Mason versus Fletcher Cox. Shaq Mason shuts down Fletcher Cox. Really good rep for Shaq Mason. Justin Haran had a few good reps in one-on-ones as well. Michael Onwenu won 1 out of 2 reps. So a much better day, I would say, what we saw. Very limited, small sample, granted. But in the one-on-ones, the offensive line looked much better than it did yesterday. And then later in practice, 11-on-11 goal line work, the Patriots were walking the ball in the end zone at times, running the football with Ramondre Stevenson scored once, Brandon Bolden scored once. So they were easily getting displacement, moving guys off the line of scrimmage in those 11-on-11 periods. So seemed like Carmen Brasillo said something to the offensive line about yesterday's performance. Obviously disappointing to get your quarterbacks pressured as much as they were in practice on Monday. So they came out today. Again, small sample, wasn't a ton of reps, but they were able to go out there and have a much better day.
Yeah, and that's certainly good. And I talked about this yesterday. I think that there is just, because the Eagles' offensive line struggled yesterday too. I think that there's some just, you work against the same guys for 3 weeks and then suddenly you got to adjust, even subconsciously. You're supposed to act like you don't know what play's coming. You're supposed to act like you don't know what moves are coming, but you're going to do it anyway. We all looked at the screen when we were playing split screen Call of Duty or split screen Halo when we were in middle school, right? We said we weren't. We tried not to, but we did. I think you just had to get used to seeing a different opponent. I honestly think that was a big part of it. And for the quarterbacks with the struggles yesterday too, I think a lot of it was just the defense had the advantage in that sort of circumstance. So it was good to see them adjust quickly and kind of bounce back today.
Yeah, just
you laugh. You were definitely a screen looker back in the day.
No, I was not a screen looker.
You were such a screen looker. You were absolutely a screen looker.
Wow, I'm offended. We're at 3:59, Alex, and the reason why I bring this up, I
actually wanted to bring this up too.
Yeah, so I just looked on to see if anybody has broken the news yet of what the last roster move is going to be for the Patriots. The Patriots currently have 86 players on their 90-man roster, right? Because they don't have to cut it down to 85 until 4 o'clock. So at 4 o'clock, they're going to have to cut it down to 85, which means some sort of transaction is going to happen. I guess right now, in the next minute, we're going to find out, or maybe the next 5 minutes or so. Alex, do you have any guesses as to what the Patriots might do to get down to 85?
So, okay, I got a couple. I think, Troy Fumagalli not being at practice today, kind of.
He was there, but he was in workout clothes, not participating.
Okay, so rule that one out, because I was going to say that the only reason I thought him is because he wasn't there late, because they need the tight end depth at this point. They need the tight end depth. So I wonder if Jared Stidham goes on IR. I wonder if, I wouldn't be surprised if it's an IR thing. I think if they cut somebody, they would have done it the other day when they cut those other 4 players. And maybe it's a lineman, RJ Prince, right? One of these guys at the bottom of the roster. Maybe it's somebody in the secondary diversion, but I just feel like if they were going to cut somebody, they would have done it the other day. I think it's going to be something with IR, or maybe a trade. Who knows? Maybe it's a trade.
Right, because the reason why they cut the guys the other day was because they didn't need to bring those guys to Philly, right? So that was, they didn't need those guys to come on the trip. So they cut those guys early. I 100% am in agreement with you. I don't have anything confirmed in terms of who it's going to be. But
the way you said that was nobody's reported it yet makes it sound like you know something.
I have a feeling that it's going to be a particular player being placed on injured reserve, but I'm not 100% certain yet. I will tell you who I'm guessing it's between, and obviously you mentioned one of them already in Jared Stidham. The other player that I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up on injured reserve in about 5 minutes is Trey Nixon, the rookie wide receiver who has not practiced for a couple of days now. Definitely seems like the perfect candidate for the Foxborough flu, right? Yeah. He's not going to be on the team this year, but maybe they want to work with him long term. He hasn't been out of practice, like I mentioned, the last couple of days. He hasn't been spotted at practice. So that's my 2 theories is Jared Stidham can actually be moved to reserve PUP to free up the roster spot, which would allow him to come back after the first 6 weeks of the regular season. So it wouldn't end his season like placing him on an injured reserve would. But Trey Nixon would be the other player that I would look at to say could potentially be placed on IR to figure up that last roster spot. We will definitely find out in any minute now. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Could Nixon be placed on that reserve PUP too?
No, because Nixon practiced already.
Right.
Right. So he can't be on PUP, but he can be on IR. And we kind of, if that ends up being the move, we kind of called this one. Not again, taking a lot of victory laps today, but we kind of talked about this, that there's really not a role for him on the team this year, but he's an interesting player with an intriguing skill set that maybe long-term, Nelson Aguilar is only on a 2-year contract, right? Jacoby Myers and N'Keal Harry are coming up on their end of their rookie deals. You never know what that wide receiver depth chart is going to look like a year from now. And maybe he can be a guy that can make the team next year. So I think that there's a chance that he's the one that ends up on injured reserve again. That's just a hunch, not anything confirmed. But Alex and I will keep an eye out on Twitter to see what the final move is. Now we've passed the 4 o'clock deadline, so they have to make one more roster move to get down to 85. So we'll let you know.
Wire doesn't come out till 5 though, right? I mean, if nobody gets it, it'll just be on the wire. Yeah.
Right. The one guy whose Twitter I keep on loading is Jim McBride's. I have a feeling that Jim will know before the wire does. So maybe you go look on Jim McBride's Twitter and he'll tell you. But anyways, let's get back to the defensive side of the football. And as I said, Alex and I will keep our eyes peeled for if that move breaks. That's going to get the Patriots down to 85 here this afternoon, league mandated deadline. But on the defensive side of the football, I want to start with maybe a positive development and get into some of the things that I saw over the last couple of days that I was a little bit more concerned about. Juwan Williams getting reps with the starting defense. I want to say for the first time in his career with the Patriots that he's getting real full-time starter reps. Now, I have some theories about maybe what this means for Jalen Mills and that sort of domino effect of allowing Juwan Williams to play outside corner to move Mills to where he's going to play during the regular season as a slot corner or money back or safety type of player, hybrid role in the inside of the defense. So Williams can kind of be a placeholder on the outside for Stephon Gilmore for right now, allowing Jalen Mills to play his more natural spot in this defense. But he also hasn't looked terrible out there. He had a nice pass breakup on Jalen Reagor today. He's been effective playing out on the boundary. So I'm interested to see if this is, we talked about N'Keal Harry's light maybe potentially turning on. Maybe Juwan Williams is sort of coming along here a little bit. That would obviously be a massive development for the Patriots. We've talked about outside corner depth being a huge concern for this team. If Juwan Williams is actually going to step up and take that job and take that bull by the horns of the third outside corner spot, that's a great development for the defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've talked about this going back to minicamp, how big a development would be if he could start to show up, and we'll see what he can do in the game. But if he can take care and lock down that third corner spot once Stephon Gilmore comes back, then I think that they're just in a much, much better place defensively than they were. So that's certainly an encouraging development. I think we need to see it in the game as well. But I don't, somebody's saying he's not a shutdown corner. He doesn't need to be locked down. He doesn't need to be shut down. He doesn't need to be Steph Gilmore. He needs to be serviceable. He needs to be Jason McCourty. And I don't know. You tell me based on what you saw today. Like, is that totally out of the question?
I don't think it's totally out of the question, right? We talked about the fact that they needed somebody to fill those snaps that Jason McCourty left behind. Jason McCourty played a ton of snaps. Now, Jalen Mills, I think, can do a lot of the things in terms of versatility that Jason McCourty did, but Jalen Mills all camp long has been a big-time liability at outside corner, and if you have to put that third corner in the game, I would much rather it be somebody that can play outside than somebody that is just another one of those money backers, right? That they have Duggar, they have Phillips, they have guys at that spot already. They really need somebody to break out on that outside boundary position. And out there at practice the last couple of days, it's felt a lot like if the puzzle has fit together a lot better in the secondary than it was before, because Mills isn't playing outside corner and he's back in the inside of the formation. So whether it's a placeholder for Stephon Gilmore and they're just putting Juwan Williams out there because they know they need to get Jalen Mills ready for the season, and that's not where they're going to put Jalen Mills once Gilmore comes back, or this is actually a positive development for Juwan Williams, remains to be seen a little bit, I guess. But the one thing that I will reiterate, when Juwan Williams is allowed to play on the boundary, he's allowed to cover bigger receivers that are going to run go balls and stuff up the field and run vertically up the field. He is fine out there. He's not a game changer, but he's fine. When wide receivers, break down and they run quick slants or they run underneath routes and shallow routes and things there's horizontal cuts to the top of their route, that's when he gets a little bit more, I would say, dicey in that spot. But at least he's not letting up the big plays. Right. That's I think, a positive. If you're going to let up a 7-yard slant underneath you, just make the tackle. right? And live to play another down. The big plays are the ones that you can't have, and he certainly didn't give up any noticeable big plays over the last 2 days.
And that's what you're looking for out of that third cornerback spot. Again, if he has to replace Stephon Gilmore, that's another question. I don't think he's up for that. But if he's there to supplement and to help rotate with Gilmore and Jackson, I think that's always been the mantra of the Patriots defense, right? Is no big plays. And if you get nickel and dimed underneath, you get nickel and dimed underneath, just stand strong in the red zone. So I think that might be enough.
I think it might be enough as well. But moving over in the secondary, I guess, or next to Juwan Williams in the secondary.
Still nothing on this roster cut. I guess
they're
waiting for the end of this dramatic Red Sox game.
Yeah, dramatic Red Sox game, and exactly when we sign off the podcast, I'm sure, is when the roster cut will come through the wire. But we'll continue to watch. Going to the tight ends. Not the Patriots tight ends, the Eagles tight ends. Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz had terrific practices out there on Tuesday. And Adrian Phillips really locked down both Hunter Henry and Johnny Smith pretty well in the practices in Foxborough. So with Adrian Phillips, you kind of hope that it's just one day or one bad day, right? And everybody's allowed to have a bad day. So you kind of hope that that's what it was for Phillips. Kyle Duggar continues to struggle in man coverage on tight ends. It's just not a role he's picking up quickly. I don't know if the panic meter is the right word for it, but where is your comfort level right now, Alex, with the way that they are going to defend tight ends this year? Are you still confident in Adrian Phillips? Because you discussed it. When you go up against the same guys in practice every single day, you start to pick up on tendencies, body language, route running, what they're going to do and stuff like that. Then you go out there against two new tight ends and Goddard and Ertz, and they seem to have their way with the Patriots today.
Yeah, I won't put too much into one practice. Again, Phillips has been really good. I think Duggar can ultimately figure it out. And they still have Devin McCourty. So I'm not totally out on them covering tight ends. I won't chalk it up to one bad day, but it's something worth keeping an eye on. I know people thought they sucked against tight ends last year. They did a little bit at the end, but through 12 games, they were the best team covering tight ends in the NFL. They had fewest catches against, fewest yards against, fewest touchdowns against from tight ends, and they went up against a wagon early in the year. They had Gesicki, they had Greg Olsen, they had Kelsey, they had Waller. Like through all of these guys, it wasn't until that Houston game when that random, I forget his name, some nobody blew him up.
But, Atkins, Jordan right. Atkins. Yeah.
But yeah, they were great against tight ends last year. They returned that personnel. Juwan Williams having to play on the outside, maybe take something away from that, but you also get Jalen Mills. I'm not too worried about it. I think it's been a little bit of an overstated concern.
So I think with Kyle Duggar, because I get this question a lot and I see it a couple times in the chat right now, what exactly is it that Kyle Duggar is forcing Kyle Duggar to struggle in that role in man coverage? And the thing that I noticed so much with him, especially in off-man situations, so when he's not pressed up on the line of scrimmage against the tight end, and it's difficult when it's impossible almost. When a tight end's in line, you can't press him, right? You just can't. It's just not the way that it's drawn up. When he's detached from the formation, you can press a little bit more. But if the tight end is running from an inline alignment or a slot alignment, it's pretty difficult to play press man out of those two spots. Usually there is some semblance of either soft press or off-man coverage. And what that tends to have happen a lot for defensive backs is they're in a situation where a receiver is running at them 5-6 yards down the field. And when the receiver is running at them, the corner or the defensive back is standing pretty much still. Right? So you have a moving guy that's coming at you from 5 or 6 yards away, and you're not moving already. So you have to be able to transition your hips, read the break, and then play catch up. And I think what I'm seeing with Kyle Duggar is that, as this fly is just killing me, flying around me right now, I think what you're seeing with Kyle Duggar is some stalling at the top of the route, right? Because his feet aren't moving quick enough and he's not moving his feet actively enough. And he gets kind of stuck in neutral when the receiver breaks. And then he has to kind of get back into the play and he kind of has to recover. And that's, I think, where certain times he struggles to do that. So if you're looking for exactly what it is, it's a footwork issue. It's a technique issue. It's not an athleticism issue. We know that. But in terms of footwork and technique, he has to do a better job in the guy that should really teach him will never teach him because he's not ever coming back to New England. But Asante Samuel is really good at it. Huh. And you have to find other corner. Maybe somebody can come back and teach him how to do it, whether it's Pat Chung or Rodney Harrison or whoever it might be. But you have to learn how to transition your hips at the top of a route and how do you work your feet, whether it's a T-step or it's a pedal or whatever it is. You have to be able to have some sort of technique. A lot of guys teach the T-step because you're able to drive on the football better, but it's risky. Asante Samuel was really good at the T-step, but it's a risky move to make. So in order to be able to figure that technique out, you have to have something. Some guys do what's called riding the bike, and they'll just pedal backwards and then read and react to the route. Other guys use the T-step. There's got to be some sort of teaching point there for Kyle Duggar about how to get his footwork down.
Yeah, and maybe it's, I don't know. I guess who else could come back that could teach him that? I'm trying to think.
I think Pat Chung is the guy, right? That's his number.
Yeah.
That's his number. Chung, if I remember correctly, Chung was a big riding the bike type of guy. So what he would do is he would flip his hips and kind of just pedal his feet a little bit as he's sort of running with his hips open up the field and then read and react to it. Like I said, Samuel is a big T-step guy. That's something that you really need to be. It's kind of like jump setting for an offensive lineman. You either nail it and you get it 100% right, or it's 6 points the other direction, right? Like it's one or the other. So you have to be really good at being able to run that type of technique. So for Duggar, I think certainly the little pedal in his step, kind of like a deep safety pedaling backwards, right? That keeps your feet active, that keeps them choppy. And then when the receiver makes a move, you read and react to the route break.
Yeah, I think so. The other one I'm thinking, like James Sanders was like sneaky good at that play, wasn't he?
Sure.
So I'm just trying. Now I'm just like in my brain trying to think of names, but
I think Chung is a good one.
Chung's obviously the guy. You're right. Chung's
Rodney Harrison.
I'm getting too fancy with it.
You're probably getting a little too fancy with it. There was a play Duggar made in zone coverage that was very, very good. That just kind of as that lurker in the middle of the field. That's where I continuously say that's where I want to see it, right? That's where I want to see him play, is in that zone coverage role as sort of a robber in the middle of the field instead of in man coverage, but they seem really dead set on making him Patrick Chung and making him cover tight ends and man. So that's what he's going to continue to do, I guess. Other things about the defensive side of the ball that I would say stood out for the Patriots, I do think it's an interesting conversation to have about Chase Winovich. I wouldn't say he's done anything that necessarily totally normal about or totally amazing or anything like that, flashy at practice yet, but that's certainly a spot that is very, very difficult to come in late in the game because you have Judon, who's a stud. You have Uche, who's looks like he could be a stud. You have Kyle Van Noy, who's a very good fit in the system and knows what he's doing. And then you also have guys like Anthony Jennings or Tashawn Bauer, who's at an okay camp at times. There's just a lot of bodies at that edge position. And now Chase Winovich is thrown into the fire. He's already behind. So I'm interested to see what happens with him. It looks to me like he's aware, just watching him out there at practice, he's aware of the uphill battle he sort of has ahead of him right now.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, that group as a whole is just so loaded. I think his best chance is how rotational do they want to be with that group, right? And I've talked about this before, where the more you can rotate those guys in and out and kind of pick your spots where you use them, the better it makes everybody because they're fresher. So how deep do they want that rotation to go? I think that's what it comes down to for a guy like him. And if they want, how much do they want Matt Judon and Kyle Van Noy playing? Because I think those are going to be the two, guys with the highest usage. Do they want them at, 65, 70%? Do they want them closer to 80%? And it's tough to say right now, and that may vary game to game. But I think that, that's a question. It's a good question. It's a question we can't answer, obviously, until the season starts. But that question is going to kind of dictate some of those guys further down on the depth chart.
So the other thing I'll mention just really quickly, somebody in the chat about Chase Winovich saying that he should play inside linebacker. It's only been a couple practices since he's been back, but no inside linebacker reps, right?
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Yeah, all edge. But I also want to talk about the kickers here really quickly. Interesting development going on with the kickers continuously. I think at this point, Quinn Ordean's been solid. He hit I believe all 3 kicks here today. There was a third kick that was a little bit unclear whether it went through or not. He was kicking from about 46, 48 yards. He looked pretty good in practice again today. But Nick Folk, that injury to Nick Folk has to be real, right? There has to be a legitimate injury going on with Nick Folk because he wasn't out of practice again today. He knows that this rookie kicker is putting on a show. He's got a leg. He can kick it, make it from 60, right? We talked about this with the Ryan Allen thing with Jake Bailey, right? You hear out of minicamp, oh, God, Ryan Allen hears that Jake Bailey is going off in minicamp, and all of a sudden he shows up to the facility and is ready to go. It kind of feels like that same sort of thing with Nick Folk, that if Nick Folk is actually hurt, this kicker competition that is very legitimate may be over already, right? If Nick Folk's not going to be back for the start of the season, then we might be talking about Quinn Nordine already.
Well, it's not a competition if one guy's hurt.
Right.
If one guy's hurt, he can't play. So I still have Nick Folk on my roster projection right now because I think if he comes back in time for the season, it's his job. If he's not back in time, they're going to have to let him go. And maybe he has practice. They can't put him on PUP. No. Maybe they try to cut Nordine or cut somebody else, right? And then you put Folk on IR. Maybe it's a guy like JJ Taylor. Maybe it's a guy like Christian Wilkerson. Maybe it's an offensive lineman where you cut that guy, you put Folk on IR, then you bring that guy back. But it's getting really tough to justify saying Nick Folk's going to be the kicker. Again, I think experience plays a big role here. If there's 2 positions that they're going to want experience more than anything else, it's quarterback and kicker. Maybe corner is the only other one that's up there on that list. But yeah, it's getting harder and harder to justify that.
It is, and he's got to get out there. If he's not healthy enough to kick, he's not going to be the kicker. It's that simple, right? I mean, that's obvious. So I think that's another interesting storyline. I also want to bring up one comment here because I think this is just funny. I'm not even trying to start any beef with anybody in Philadelphia, but I find this hilarious. So there's a couple of tweets going around today from Eagles beat writers saying how much the Eagles were dominating the Patriots in practice today. This was one particular tweet. I'm not going to name names, so I'm really not trying to start anything here. But there was a tweet out there that said that the Patriots failed to score on 14 straight red zone plays today against the Eagles defense. And the ironic part and the funniest part about the tweet, Alex, was that right after the tweet was sent, right before the tweet was sent, literally right before the tweet was sent, Cam had just thrown probably his best pass of the day on a touchdown pass to Nelson Aguilar.
That's what happens.
Right. And for the life of me, I have never seen so many reports because people were sending them to me all week. Oh, this Eagles writer is saying that Eagles writer is saying this. They were watching 2 different practices from the ones that we were watching. The Patriots reporters, we were all in the group in the stands. The Eagles reporters were mostly walking on the sideline because you're allowed to do that here. And they must have been at a different practice than the rest of us because I saw consistent fibbing from the Eagles beat reporters saying that the Eagles, like this one, 14 straight red zone plays, which is just absolute BS. Like that never happened. Right? That's just remotely not true. And I just find that so weird. Why lie to the public? Like, why make up things, right? Because
people think we do that all the time. We don't. People think we do.
I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. You're right, because to a degree, we don't care, right? What happens? Well, we just tell you what we're seeing. We're just telling you what's happening. We're giving you almost play-by-play of what is going on out at these practices. And then we tell you, okay, Cam had a good day. Mac had an okay day, had the interception, yada, yada, yada. Then you can make your own opinions out of that, right? And for some reason, the last couple of days out here, I know it's a stupid thing to talk about, but last couple of days out here today, there was a ton of lying by the Eagles beat out here talking about how the Patriots couldn't do anything right, didn't win a single rep the last 2 days. There's a lot of this team is in a lot of ways rebuilding. And so I wonder if that has something to do with it, is that they're trying to strum up some interest in the team, some hype in the team. Talk about Jalen Hurts. He had a great couple of practices. He looks really solid. He's a threat. He's somebody that's very difficult to contain. They can do a lot of different types of schemes with him because of his legs and his running ability. So it's interesting to see what happens with this Eagles team moving forward. They definitely did have some strong practices out here today and yesterday, had some good moments as well. But it's an interesting thing that you just make up all these lies about what you're seeing out at practice.
Yeah, I mean, I can't explain it. I don't do it. I mean, everybody has their own internal biases, right? And I know sometimes maybe I've phrased a tweet or phrased a report that, I go back and I watch. I was like, oh, why did I say that like that? But
right.
Yeah, I've never made anything up. I've never, if I say so-and-so caught this many passes, he caught this many passes. If they didn't score for this many straight plays, they didn't score for this many straight plays. I may try to, put context in it. I may be like, hey, they didn't score for 14 straight plays, but then on the next, like the Patriots then scored 3 straight touchdowns. Like I throw that context in there, but
right.
It's Philly, man.
It's an interesting town.
I'm not gonna say my piece on people from Philly, but
no, me neither. So. We can save that for an off-season podcast.
Yeah,
I am definitely stalling right now to see if we get this roster moved before we sign off. I don't think we're going to get it, which is weird because it had to happen by 4:00. So at this point, all these other teams are coming out, typical Patriots fashion, to hold on to this one. Like we said, it does feel like an IR move or a pup reserve, active pup to reserve pup type of move on the horizon here, though, for the Patriots.
Yeah, again, I think if it was a cut, it would have been done already. They wouldn't have brought the guy to Philly. So I think Trey Nixon's a good one. I still think Stidham could fit as well. I mean, there's really no place for him. I think Brian Hoyer is the better option as that third quarterback. That roster spot is basically your scout team quarterback. And Hoyer is going to be a better scout team's quarterback than Stidham. He's a better scout team quarterback than just about anybody in the league. So I'm
talking about Patriots legends, Jake Dolegala back to the Green Bay Packers.
Oh, let's go, Jake, baby.
So Jake Dolegala going back and forth between the Patriots.
They signed Jake Dolegala.
Nope. No, back to the Packers. He was just with the Packers, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because they waived him. Yeah, I don't think anybody had signed him since he got waived, whatever that was, like 2 weeks ago. So
here we can take a few questions and we'll stall till 4:30 and see if this move comes down on the wire. Why keep Jared Stidham? Here's one question. We haven't talked a ton about Stidham because he hasn't been healthy. He hasn't been out there, right? So what's the future hold for Jared Stidham with the Patriots, Alex? I sort of feel like he can still be a backup to Mac Jones, right? Maybe he's a solid backup in his career.
Right.
I'm not sure if he's got the Brian Hoyer thing with him about, Brian Hoyer has got a great football mind. He's basically a coach, right? I don't know if that's Jared Stidham's future, but a solid backup to Mac Jones is not necessarily a bad thing to have.
It's not, and that's why, again, I think he makes sense to IR because I don't think he has a role this year. I wonder if, and this analogy is going to piss off so many people. You ready for this? I wonder if Jared Stidham is the Notre Dame quarterback. I wonder if Jared Stidham
Brady Quinn.
Jimmy Clausen. If
okay.
Jared Stidham is Jamie Clausen to Mac Jones, Cam Newton. And that has nothing to do with Cam Newton being on the Patriots now. What I'm saying is
I got you saying.
The Panthers knew they were going to need a quarterback. They weren't in a spot to take an elite quarterback. Jimmy Clausen fell a bit in the draft. They took him to see what was there. Nothing was there. They end up with the top pick next year. They get Cam Newton, and then they ultimately solve their quarterback. Doesn't that kind of feel like that's what happened with Stidham? We're going to need a quarterback soon. Fell a little bit compared to where he's supposed to go. If he turns into the guy, great. If not, we didn't invest a ton. He didn't turn into the guy, and that presented them with the chance to go up and get the elite quarterback prospect in Mac Jones. So I know people are going to get mad that I'm comparing Mac Jones to Cam Newton. That's just a coincidence. That has nothing to do with Cam Newton's tenure with the Patriots. But I actually think in some ways what the Panthers did in 2009, 2010 with Clausen and Newton, I think that's actually a really effective way to find your next quarterback because the guy won't always work out. But if he doesn't, it kind of pushes you into that tank. And if he does work out, then you have your quarterback. Congratulations. There you go. So not a lot of people use that format, that template. I don't know why they don't. I think it's a really good way to build your team. So that's kind of, in a best case, I think that's sort of what Stidham is. Stidham's Jimmy Clausen, Mac Jones is Cam Newton. I understand how loaded that is, but if you just, kind of step away from the angry button for a second, which I know is tough for people to do online, but that's kind of how it's played out. So
I remember when we were talking about quarterbacks in the draft, and I actually looked into teams that have historically drafted 2 quarterbacks in the same draft, and sort of the poster child of that move is the RG3 and Kirk Cousins combination in Washington, right? That was worked out really well for them. RG3 unfortunately got hurt, ruined a great career, whatever. But at least Kirk Cousins was able to come in as a 4th round pick, I believe it was, and play pretty well for Washington. So that was sort of a model. This is kind of another way of going about it, I guess, with Mac Jones and Jared Stidham type of way. But that's similar, right? Where Kirk Cousins, the 2nd overall pick, RG3, 4th round pick in Kirk Cousins, the 15th overall pick and a 4th round pick. So not too far off, obviously not the same draft. Here's another question. Who is going to be in Josh McDaniels' ear with Nick Caserio no longer here? So I think that this is a good opportunity. We talked a bunch about Matt Patricia's role when he came back to the Patriots, but we can kind of give a picture behind the scenes look of what Matt Patricia has been doing. So yesterday in practice, Bill Belichick, as he always does at practice for the most part, was standing maybe 15, 20 yards behind the defense, the Patriots defense, and watching the Patriots defense and that from that direction, from basically, if you're looking at a coach's tape, like the end zone angle, right? That's what Bill Belichick was doing. On the other field, Matt Patricia was doing the exact same thing with the Patriots offense. So I think that Patricia is serving that sort of role of viewing those types of things. In the preseason game against Washington, he was in the booth with a headset, Matt Patricia was. So something tells me that Matt Patricia is taking on a lot of those responsibilities. Ernie would stand there with the arms folded, right? Like this. Matt Patricia's not doing that, but he does seem to be having a similar type of role. I don't know if it's such analytically heavy as Ernie Adams was, but in terms of kind of being an extra set of eyes for the head coach.
Yeah, and then there's also I always forget his name, Evan Rothstein. Is that it?
Yeah. So Evan Roth, for lack of a better term, Evan Rothstein's the nerd, right? He's the guy that is doing the numbers and punching all the numbers.
So I guess maybe he replaces Ernie more than
football guy.
I guess maybe he replaces Ernie more than Caserio, if this is what we're talking about. Because I'm thinking like headset down to the sideline, right? And I was talking to McDaniels. I don't know. I read this as like, because Ernie had the direct line to Bill. I for whatever reason read this as that. I'm sorry. I'm writing something about the Celtics in the background. Schedule announcement.
Jesus. Alex.
You got to do what you got to do.
Got to do it.
Do we have a roster
good
cut
multitasking?
Here? Thank you.
We do not. We do not have a roster cut. So, in the interest of not prolonging this any longer,
well, I know you got to catch a flight. So
I got to catch a flight, and we tried to stall as long as we could to hear if we were going to find out.
Going to?
I am. There's only one airport.
Hide which airline?
Now, I'm also staying because you made me feel like a diva. I'm staying at the DoubleTree. I'm about to leave the DoubleTree.
It doesn't count now that you said it.
No reason to hide it anymore. Yeah, nice hotel we have over here. Philadelphia Airport.
You did this yesterday with
10 minutes from NovaCare.
No, you did this yesterday with JetBlue. Until they cut us a check, that's all you got to say.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, it's a good spot. It's really close to the Eagles practice facility, so that made it easier. But Alex and I are going to be back on the podcast tomorrow afternoon, probably around closer to the normal time, 4:30, to break down preview, I should say, preseason game number 2 against the Philadelphia Eagles on Thursday night. So we will be back on the show then. Alex, anything else that you want to say before we sign off? Plug any of your coverage.
Yep. 98.5thesportshub.com. I'll have a roster projection up tomorrow morning. There'll be a what to watch for up on Thursday morning ahead of the game Thursday night. Podcast with you and Phil Perry recapping the practices from Philadelphia. Again, on 98.5 The Sports Hub, or if you go to 98.5 Patriots Audio, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find them there as well.
Awesome. So we were just on that podcast, the training camp recap podcast on 98.5 together as well. So if you're not sick of Alex and I yet, you can go over to that podcast and listen to that now. It's a 20 minutes, great listen, really quick, not as long as this one. So go ahead and listen to that as well. On CLNSmedia.com, I have 2 notebooks up from the last 2 practices. We'll do some sort of a game preview tomorrow or Thursday as well. And at some point, I'm going to write the monster a thought on every single player that I've seen so far at training camp. I don't know if I'm going to do every single player.
No, you got to do every player. That's how
I don't know if I need to do every player. We'll see how long it gets.
Instead of 90 if you just wait on the
right. So I had I have about 64 players listed right now and have legitimate chances of making the 53. I'll probably sprinkle in a few more there, here and there, but I'm not going to talk about the guys that have zero chance of making the team.
I want to know. I want to know what you think of RJ Prince. I want to know what you think of RJ Prince.
That's what I think of RJ Prince. No. So you can check that out. That will be out on Saturday. I think I'm going to wait till after the game just so that nothing major changes. I always feel like when you write something like that big before the game, it everything changes right based off of everybody else's opinions because you're not at a training camp. So you can check that out on CLNSmedia.com. Notebooks as well are up there as well, and we'll be covering the game on Thursday night from the home base. I'm not staying here in Philadelphia for the game, so we'll have you covered on Patriots CLNS through during and through the game as well. We'll do a recap show afterwards, and then Alex and I will do the recap pod on Sunday time on Friday. But until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody.